Season 5 of My Hero Academia is here, and I know everybody has to be just as excited as me, right? Yeah, let's just say I'm right. So, something I want to do every single week from now on is I want to do recap/reaction videos to the episodes that come out. I know I've already missed the first two, so what we're going to do today, we're going to talk about the first two episodes, some of my favorite moments, some speculations. What do I think is going to happen? What do you want to see happen? Let's just jump right into it. I will put this out there. I have read the manga, but there's not going to be any spoilers from that in there. We're going to be talking anime only, and any speculation that I'm going to put out there is only going to be from the anime. So the first episode's here, and the manga fans kind of know where we're going to go when we start, right? Absolutely not. We're going in a completely different direction than where we thought we would go. So we're starting off with a training exercise. Essentially, that's what the whole episode is. We kind of get into where we thought Season 5 would pick up towards the end, but we'll talk about that later. So the first thing we see is pretty much everybody in class talking about Endeavor saving the day and beating the Nomu and how amazing that was. And we get to see kind of Class 1A's reactions. Shoto like, wow, should I give this guy a chance? That kind of thing. So we see that as how the season opens up. We also get a recap and kind of the highlights of the Endeavor versus Nomu fight. We get to see my boy Hawks doing some things. It's great. I mean, it's cool we get to see that, so it just refreshes your mind. So we're kind of getting started slowly. Right when we think we're about to see the aftermath of that fight, we go to class. And that's when the training exercises start. And we get 80% of the world's population has what's known as a quirk. So, you know Deku has to start off an episode with that, right? It's actually not a season of My Hero Academia if Deku doesn't do that. And I think that's kind of the rule. Immediately right when it jumps to the training, we see Deku and Bakugo jumping out ahead of the pack. And those two are kind of making it a competition to see who can get out of the tunnel first. And it's cool to see those guys side by side, because I think their relationship is really starting to grow. Even through My Hero Academia Season 4, we get to see some of that. The new theme happens, and it's an absolute bop. Let's just appreciate it. It's probably not Season 3 good, but it's really good. The fun part about this training episode that we're kind of seeing leading into Season 5 is we get to see the big three of Nejire, Mirio, and Tamaki all helping Class 1A train. Obviously, Mirio still doesn't have his quirk, so it's funny. He's just doing little instances where he's got to be saved by Class 1A, and it's funny. Like, you see him floating down a river, and you see his face going. It kind of looks like his quirk. You know how you would, like, poke through the walls, but he's just laying there in the water, and Mineta ends up having to go save him, and it's really funny. I think it's Mineta and Froppy. They get him and save him, and eventually it's another point where he's just like, oh, let me mess things up again. So he jumps off and goes back in the water after they already save him, and Mineta's pretty much makes the joke, is he doing this on purpose? Yeah, he kind of is. But it ends up not being only a rescue mission to save Mirio, because that's when Nejire shows up and she's battling everybody as well. And she shows off her amazing skills. And then following up on that, then Tamaki then comes in, and let's be honest, Tamaki is super adorable. He shows up and he's like, I'm not sure I really even want to be here right now. Well, he really doesn't. And there's actually a joke at one point where he's like, why don't you just go home? And he's like, because Mirio needs me here. And like, it's just such a cute little moment there. But at the very beginning of the training, we have Bakugo, Kaminari, and Kirishima all branch off, of course, and they kind of do their own thing. So eventually they come back when Nejire's there and Tamaki's there, and you see them coming up. Kaminari's actually like charged up a car. He's essentially got the cords in his mouth, and he's like driving the car. And you've got Kirishima and Bakugo on the front. Let me just state this here. Kiribaku Simps, I'm going to be honest with you, you kind of get some juice here. So we essentially see Kirishima and Bakugo on the hood of the car. First we see Kirishima, and he essentially jumps off and breaks Tamaki's back with an attack. And it's kind of sad because Tamaki didn't want to be there in the first place, and he's like getting beat up. Anyway, then we see Bakugo fly in, and he was on the same hood that Kirishima was on. And so essentially, I'm pretty sure they were like sitting on each other's lap. Kirishima was on Bakugo's lap, he flies. Anyway, it's funny. Kiribaku Simps, you got a little moment there, so we'll put that out there. So Bakugo flies over as well, and he's just like, die! You know how Bakugo is. And so he essentially gets Tamaki and is like, you're a villain, you damn nerd, I'm gonna blow... It's a whole thing. He's like, I'll treat every enemy the same. I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to blow you up. And Tamaki's just like, oh, I really don't want to be here right now. We know Tamaki. It's really sad. Bakugo shouldn't do you like that, but whatever. After Bakugo pretty much kills Tamaki with his explosion, it cuts over to All Might, and he's just like, send Bakugo to my office. It's hilarious. But yeah, it was just a fun little way to get Season 5 going. I'm not going to say that's where I expected it to go. I thought we was going to kind of deal with that Endeavor Nomu aftermath. And that's when I'm sitting there watching the credits, and all of a sudden, boom, it cuts to Endeavor in the hospital bed. Then it pans over. After the fight, we see Dabi shows up. And manga readers know what I'm talking about when Dabi just comes up, sets flame ablaze, and he says, well, Endeavor, should I say, nice to meet you? And we're like, what? Right there, you're going to drop that at the end of the episode so we don't have any, like, thing to go off of except that. And then directly after that, it cuts over to Hawks enter into like some sort of port. It's late at night and he pulls his feather sword on Dabi. You didn't tell me the Nomu would be that strong. And Dabi's like, well, you didn't tell me the #1 hero would be there. And so essentially we're seeing that setup where Hawks is going to be working with the League of Villains somehow. Manga readers, again, know why. Anime only watchers, you'll see. But that's pretty much episode 1, and it paves the way for episode 2. So we're all excited and ready, and then, boom, that's when it opens up. Very first part of episode 2, we see Endeavor laying there on the hospital bed, and we know we're about to get into it. So episode 2 essentially starts where season 4 ended. We see Hawks and Endeavor kind of just sitting there resting after the Nomu fight, and Hawks is like, oh, come on, man, you get some style points for that at least. And Endeavor's like, no, that was bad work. And you're like, dude, you beat the Nomu, just chill, whatever. And Hawks is just trying to build him up a little bit there, which is pretty cute, because, you know, we love Hawks. Heyo. Right then, we see Dabi show up, and he's all, well, Endeavor, should I say nice to meet you? And you're like, oh! And then all of a sudden, we see him just set flames ablaze. So I'm talking like just swirling blue flames. Let's just say the art style is absolutely insane. It looks beautiful right there. But after that, we're just kind of worried because he's like, who says I can't beat the 2 top heroes beaten and bloodied? And like Endeavor's like, you're the one who killed Snatch. And Dabi's like, killed... What are you talking about? It's a cool little exchange there. Eventually, it cuts to a scene where you see Dabi just thinking, and he's like, oh yeah, Snatch. That's who I killed. Yeah, so he acknowledges it later. He just didn't get it in the moment there. But right when he's about to attack Hawks and Endeavor, who are both very much injured, Hawks doesn't even have his wings at this point, Mirko shows up. Let me just say, this queen, she shows up just legs the size of like tree trunks, essentially. Kicks the flames out, essentially. Goes to kick Dabi, ends up being just a clone, essentially, you know, kind of how the twice clones work. But that was the end of that exchange. So Mirko shows up and saves the day there. You know, she can save anybody's day, let's be honest. So that's pretty much what happened. She looks over to Endeavor and Hawks and is like, I'm not going to let you two have all the fun. So it's a really cool exchange there and a nice introduction for Mirko. But as Dabi's fading away with the clone, he looks over at Endeavor and says, I'll be seeing you soon, NG Todoroki. He drops Endeavor's actual name. So at that point, you're like, ooh, it seems kind of personal. The next thing we see after Dabi leaves is it cuts to the scene where Endeavor and Hawks are kind of meeting up at that little port / building that they're meeting up at. And it's kind of a secretive meetup, and Hawks actually doesn't have his wings now. He shows up with a feather sword, and Dabi's like, I thought you were out of feathers. And Hawks is like, oh, come on, I'm not going to meet up with a liar like you unarmed. And so we see the scene there where Dabi's essentially saying, you're going to have to prove it to the boss for me to get him to meet you, talking about Shigaraki. And so Hawks is then like, well, what do I have to do, man? I'm doing everything I can. Dabi essentially tells Hawks there's going to be some more things you're going to have to do before you're accepted with us. And then it cuts to a scene where Hawks is talking with the Heroes Commission. Essentially what the Heroes Commission says is, Hawks, you're going to have to join up with the League of Villains. We want you to get some intel. So you're going to be going undercover and being a double agent. Hawks is then like, what about all the people they hurt while I'm working with them? Am I supposed to turn a blind eye to that? Then they're like, you can turn a blind eye, and you will turn a blind eye. It then cuts to Hawks as a child, and we get to see a little bit of his backstory as a kid. We get to see him coming from essentially a broken home. They don't really get into the details of that, but you can kind of see the home looks a wreck, and he's just little Hawk standing there when the Heroes Commission come and gets him. And he essentially saved a whole family from a car wreck in the blink of an eye when he was just a child. So you could see he's going to be like a hero prodigy from a young age. And so the Hero Commission tells him it's going to be some strenuous work. You think you can do it? And little baby Hawks is like, yeah, I can do it. And it's really sad, but it's really interesting to see that, you know, he's going to be trained from a very young age to be a hero. And he comes from he has a hard past, hard life growing up. And it then cuts to Hawks' signature phrase, I just want to make it where heroes have too much time on their hand. And like, that's his goal in life, to make it where there's nothing for the heroes to do because everybody's already safe and all the bad guys have already been stopped. And Hawks wants to save people at a super fast speed, and that's his goal. The next scene we cut to is a scene that I personally have been waiting for a while from the manga. So it cuts to the Todoroki home, and everybody's sitting there eating, and that's when Endeavor walks in after the battle from the Nomu fight. So Todoroki's essentially sitting down, slurping down some noodles, and he looks up at Endeavor, who now has a huge scar running down the side of his face. And he says, That's a pretty nasty scar you got there. And it is just the burn of the century. And I know all the manga readers were waiting for it because I personally was waiting for to see that animated. And it was hilarious. So I really appreciated getting to see that. Because, and it also shows Aizawa sitting outside of the Todoroki house and a cat's like hissing at him. And Aizawa looks at the cat all seductively like, not towards the cat, but just for everybody else watching. And he goes, and we're just like, oh, okay. But Natsu, Todoroki's older brother, is not having this dinner at all. So right when Endeavor shows up, Natsu gets up and storms out. Endeavor puts his hands on his shoulder and is like, look, I'm sorry for what I've done in the past. Natsu's like, you may be the #1 hero, but I know what you did to my older brother. Look at how you like treated us, how you tormented mom. And it's just a whole weight of emotions that gets dropped on you there. And you kind of see what, you know, the other Todoroki siblings, how they feel about Endeavor. Because, you know, Todoroki, he pretty much like was a prodigy. He worked under Endeavor, so he got a lot of that trauma firsthand because Endeavor essentially, you know, bullied him, just made him work super hard to become the hero and live up to be the #1 hero so he could say that, hey, I produced this #1 hero. So it's, you know, he's the #1 hero now, but he don't feel like he actually accomplished that because, you know, he just took over from All Might after All Might retired and lost One for All. But right after that, it cuts over to Todoroki and he tells Endeavor, while not looking at him directly, he says something small can change a person. And I think he's referring to when Deku, you know, talked to him and says it's your quirk, not his. And so he knows that there can be a spark or a change in a person. So he's going to give him that chance to play that out as his father, which was a really, really great and emotional scene. So after we get that whole weight of emotion dropped on us, it directly cuts to Deku, who has been training, and he just plops down in his bed. Right after that, he starts having the dreams of the vestiges of One for All. And so we're seeing all the users of One for All, Deku being the ninth, they're just all there. Deku, essentially, he can't walk, he can't talk, only this part of his head is actually like visible, like it's kind of like shadowed everything else, and it's like they're trying to communicate with him, and he's just like, you know, what do you want from me? What is it that I need to do? So the vestiges start showing Deku the vision of All for One talking to the original user of One for All, which is, you know, All for One's little brother. He's essentially saying the world isn't taking to some of these heroes in the way. Like, there's a person essentially that has fangs grown out of his mouth, and his family calls him a monster. And then there's a person who has no quirk, and he was attacked by people who do have quirks. So what All for One ends up doing is he ends up switching them. So one has the quirk and one doesn't. So the other person can go back to his normal life, and the other person then has his quirk. So essentially, that's how All for One's getting his army built up. He's giving people quirks, and then he's getting them indebted to him so that they have to serve him in some sort of way. And All for One's brother is against that. He's saying, you're just literally making an army there. And All for One does care about his little brother because he's like, your body's too weak for me to even give you a quirk, so I'll give you something that you can have. And that's when he gives him One for All, a quirk that he can pass down, but it essentially does nothing for him because he's quirkless. There's a pretty cool moment between All for One and his little brother there, where All for One's little brother essentially is like, you know this makes you the bad guy, right? And then that's when All for One's just like, you know, the bad guy, essentially like the bad guys are going to win. I'm going to get what I want. And he's like, don't you remember that comic book we read when we were little? And that's when All for One's brother goes, yeah, I don't think you actually finished that comic book because in the end, the Demon King loses and bad always loses in the end. So good will prevail. And that's just kind of a cool little moment there. And Deku's getting to see all of that. You know, the vestiges are showing Deku these images. But right after that, that's when All for One puts his hand on his little brother's head and transfers him One for All. But immediately after Deku sees the visions, the original user of One for All turns to him and says, please be careful. We're long past the point of the singularity. And even though you're only at 20%, you're not alone. Which is like, what? What do you mean I'm not alone? Are you guys like watching everything? Like, what's going on here? So that's something that we will be following up on later in Season 5, hopefully, according to the manga. But I guess we'll see. Immediately after that, Deku wakes up in his bed, kind of similar to how he did in Season 4, and like the windows are broke and stuff's kind of just strewn over the room, and One for All is lit up in Deku's body, and he's just like, what is happening here? What is One for All doing to me? Like, it's insane. I feel like episode 2 is the original episode of Season 5. We just kind of had the spoiler/training episode. It's kind of like a fun / welcome back to My Hero Academia. But Season 2 really gets going. We get to see some of the Hawks and Dabi, also the Endeavor and Todoroki family drama. We also get to see the vestiges of One for All. We are really getting into what Season 5 is going to be about. So that pretty much does it for the first 2 episodes. Obviously, Season 2 gets a lot more into what Season 5 is going to be about. We get to see a fun training session in Episode 1. But it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm really looking forward to season 5. I'll be back next week once episode 3 comes out, and I'm really hoping we get to see a little bit more Hawks and Dabi. We get to get into some of the training arc stuff that we're going to be seeing some in season 5. I know you've seen the trailers for that, and Bakugo getting his new winter costume, and everybody getting some new additions, working on their quirks. We're going to have a lot of fun things to see here in season 5, so I'm super excited, and I hope you are too. Anyway, one thing I have to say before we go: 80% of the world's population has what's known as a quirk. I hope you have a great day. One for all. Full cowling! Bye!